I just want to say I'm so happy to see so many people here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I know it's not always easy to get indoors when it's so beautiful outside. But I thank you and I welcome you. This is an Indivisible event. This one's on diversity. And like I said, I want to welcome you. I'm Valerie Haskins. I'm not used to doing this. Usually our leader does this, Carolyn. Can you wave your hand, Carolyn?
Branching out.
We're pleased to provide this opportunity with the work and help of many others as we meet new people and have a chance to learn about Islam, its history, its roots, and how we have more in common than not. I want to share that in the midst of a greatly traumatic year, a travel ban that targeted Muslims, I vowed to myself that I would not be silent. In the words of the late Martin Luther King Jr., our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And humanity matters. All of us matter. I attended the Rally for Peace and Equality in Columbus last year, and it was there that I met some very lovely ladies from the local Islamic Center. We exchanged phone numbers, we started to talk to each other, and several of us have visited there, and they've made us feel so welcome, and we've created some friendships, and I'm just thankful for them. I know they don't want me to point them out, but they're great. I love them. I have a few people in the audience that I want to recognize today. We have some candidates that are running for our congressional 3rd district. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. A little closer. Okay. Chuck Enderlin is here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chuck.
Chuck's running. And we also have Rusty Oliver running for 3rd congressional. So, if you're May 22nd is the primary. So if you're in the 3rd district or anywhere, you have primaries to vote on. Okay, so right now I'm going to ask Carolyn to come up and talk to you about what's going on in Indivisible. Did you want to tell them a few things?
Yeah, just an update on a kind of a major event that we had this past week. And I apologize. Let me find it real fast. Here it is. The goal of Indivisible, or the mission of Indivisible, is basically to advocate for everyone, to champion the values of inclusion, tolerance, and justice, and to champion racial, economic, environmental justice, basically justice across the board. The way that we do that is by pressuring all of our congressmen, our senators, and our representatives in our district. So those are the 2 senators of Georgia and our Representative Bishop and Representative Drew Ferguson in the 3rd district and Bishop in the 2nd. So after the school shooting, myself and Lydia Ray, who is our member in the group, who's also the leader of the local Moms Demand Action on Gun Sense, asked Representative Bishop again if we could meet with him to speak about his voting record on guns. So he agreed, and we met with him Thursday, and I'm just going to read my summary from our Indivisible group real quickly so that those of you who knew we were going are aware of how that came out. And we went on behalf of Indivisible Columbus, Georgia, Indivisible Macon, and Sumter Speaks, which is an Indivisible group in Americus in that area. So I went on behalf of all of us, which is a fairly large amount of our population in the 2nd district. No. When we started the conversation, he said that he had asked the NRA to hold the money that he's getting from the NRA. he said he asked them to hold it. We said that holding it was a political move, and we would appreciate if he would distance himself and not accept it. He said that he was thinking about doing that, but he hadn't made up his mind yet. So we're going to be following up with that and find out. He said, I'm sorry. He told us many of his voters across the southern end of his district voted for him and are rabid NRA supporters, and their vote could have been the difference between him being in office or his opponent being in office. So he was still considering his NRA money, though it's not much more than being symbolic. We reminded him there were far more of us than there are of them, and he should not take our vote for granted. He seemed to hear us, so we're hopeful that he'll do the right thing on that. Another gentleman who was at the meeting, but he had to leave early, brought up the ban on the military-style weapons. That was you. Hello. Nice to see you. He stopped the discussion and said many of his voters are farmers with herds of boar destroying their crops, and they hire contractors to kill them at night. They say they can't be as effective at killing as many as possible without the use of the AR-15 or the AK-47. We said perhaps there could be a license and regulation for people in this business and that they should have to be registered with the police. But to say no ban whatsoever due to this small number of farmers was not a good enough reason. He said reasonable steps should be taken to restrict these from the hands of people who are not responsible and has no problem with registering guns with the police, those guns. He said he would vote for closing the gun show loophole. We asked if he would introduce legislation. He said he would vote for it and chuckled, saying he had to think of the 50% of his voters who wouldn't like that. We reminded him not to take our vote for granted. He agrees mental health needs funding and was disappointed when the funding was lost in 2010. He thinks the database for background checks needs to be improved, though he does not think a waiting period is a good idea. He agrees teachers don't need to be armed, but he does think armed guards is a good idea. He said campus carry is a terrible, terrible, terrible decision on the part of the General Assembly. He stated that concealed carry reciprocity will not pass the Senate. He said they do not have the votes to pass the Senate, and that he believes that anyone who wants to carry a gun legally and has been given the permits to do so should be allowed to do so across the states. We informed him that we have the library reserved April 30th when he's on recess, and we would like him to have a town hall, hold a town hall. So our call to action is going to be everybody please write to him and ask that he hold a town hall on the 30th. And he's very responsive to us, and we're very, very grateful that he's responsive to us. Our task is not to push him out of office. Our task is to keep him in office, but push him on the votes that we do not agree with. So we were very, very grateful that he did agree to meet us, and I think that we might have had a little bit of an impact, and if we keep it up, we just may succeed in making our country a little bit safer with guns. And I will give it back to Valerie. Thank you for letting me say that.
I just want to announce 3 big things we have coming up soon, and if you want, we have a handout on the table where you come in. March the 11th, we have an event, I believe that's at the Unitarian Church, Now is Beyond the Time for Sensible Gun Reform. March 24th, we're having a March for Our Lives, and Saturday, April the 7th, is really a fun one. We're going to a farm that's a sustainable farm, and they're going to have, I think, dinner or lunch for us. So that's a fun one.
Where is the rally March 24th?
Okay, that is going to be...
March 24th is going to be the rally to save our lives. It's the event that's being put on in D.C. by the students of Parkland, in Parkland. And we are holding a sister rally and a sister march, and we have put in the permits. We're going to have a march starting at the Government Center. If it's approved, the rally and the march will begin at the Government Center on 9th Street. And the form, this here, there's some out there, but it's going to go from 9th Street down through Broadway during the farmers market that's going on, so we'll have a lot of eyes on us. And we want everybody to come and show that we want our country safe. We don't want guns taken away, but we want our country and our schools safer. We want certain guns not necessarily able to be just gotten. So it's the 24th Saturday, begins at 11 o'clock, begins at the Government Center on 9th, between 1st and 2nd, the tall building downtown, and then we're gonna parade through downtown, down to Front Avenue where the children's playground is, and then back up through Broadway where the market's going on, and hopefully have a lot of visibility, and hopefully Bishop and others will see us so that they can do the right thing for our children and for everyone else.
Thank you, Carol.
Can we bring signs?
Yes, bring signs, bring your children, bring anybody that you know that supports this effort. Thank you for asking.
Okay, we're going to move on to our main event. But before you leave today, I am going to ask everybody if you would meet someone in this room that you have never met before and just introduce yourself, because we're here to make connections and build bridges. CAIR from Atlanta, CAIR, means Council on American Islamic Relations. And we're lucky, and I'm really happy to have Ahmed Mitchell. He is a Muslim American attorney and former journalist who serves as Executive Director of CAIR Georgia. Mitchell is a graduate of Morehouse College and Georgetown University Law Center, previously served as a criminal prosecutor for the city of Atlanta. Mitchell is also an editor of AtlantaMuslim.com and a member of the Georgia Association of Muslim Lawyers and a member of the Board of Trustees of the Islamic Community Center of Atlanta. Mitchell embraced Islam during his studies at Morehouse College, where he served as captain of the school's mock trial team and president of the Honors Program Club, and editor-in-chief of the campus newspaper, the Maroon Tiger. So it's with this, I'd like for you to give a warm welcome. He came all the way from Atlanta today. Thank you very much. And he's going to do a 45-minute presentation, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Good. So let me begin by saying thank you to Valerie and Indivisible for hosting this event. I really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the work that you are doing. I fully support all the work you're doing, especially regarding an assault weapons ban. You cannot drive a tank down Main Street. You should not be able to walk around with an assault rifle. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Please give them another round. So, again, my name is Ahmed Mitchell. I'm the director of CAIR Georgia. By day, I am a lawyer. Don't hate me. Distrust me, perhaps, so don't hate me. I'm the director of CAIR Georgia, which is the Georgia chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. As you may know, CAIR is part of our nation's largest Muslim civil rights organization. What the NAACP does for African Americans, what the Anti-Defamation League does for Jewish Americans, CAIR does for American Muslims. Our main focus is countering anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Muslim discrimination. Sometimes in the court of law, sometimes in the court of public opinion. But as part of that mission, we also spend a significant amount of time engaging in interfaith dialogue. That is, meeting and talking with people of other faiths, explaining Islam, answering tough questions about our faith, about Muslims. And the reason we do that is that our theory is that education is the best vaccine against discrimination. That is, it's really hard to hate someone if you know a little bit about them. And public polling bears that out. If you ask the American people, do you have a positive or a negative opinion of Muslims? A large chunk will say negative, a chunk will say positive, a chunk will say, I don't know. If you ask a follow-up question, well, do you know any Muslims? What do you think happens? People with a negative opinion, no, don't know one, don't want to meet one, never met one. Positive, yeah, friend, coworker, whatever. Don't know, often never met one. And so what we found in our work is that just meeting people who are American Muslims, just learning a little bit about Islam can go a long way towards building bridges and breaking down barriers. So that's why I spend a lot of time doing this. We often give these presentations to church groups, sometimes to political groups. The Tea Party, that was a fun conversation. I made it out alive, so it's okay. They were tough questions, but friendly. They were open to talking. But no, it's really important to dialogue, and not just with people who are friendly. And it's not just for Muslims. I mean, this is something that people of all faiths and backgrounds should do. Mormons, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, Protestants, we all have something we can learn from each other, and it really does go a long way towards erasing some of the division we see in our society. We're all in our little corners, and it doesn't end well, as we see anytime we turn on the news. So that's why we do this, and I'm very happy to be with you here today. The first thing I'm going to tell you is what we're going to do. So when I give this presentation, depending on the audience, sometimes I have to go really, really fast and talk really, really fast. Sometimes I have time, so I can talk really slowly. Thankfully, thank God, we have time today, so I'm going to talk a little slower than I usually do and go through this in a little more detail than I normally do. There are 3 topics that I cover when I give this presentation. The first is, who are Muslims, demographically speaking. The second is, what do Muslims believe, basic theology. The last is, what do Muslims practice? Day to day, what are the things that Muslims are doing? What are we up to in the mosque 5 times a day? Not plotting mayhem, I assure you. And the last part I think is the most important, that's questions. Questions and answers. And I really think that's the most important thing I can do, because everyone's got some question on their mind, something they've heard that they might want to get clarified. So I really want you to feel free to ask anything and everything on your mind. It can be a boring or tame question. It can be a hostile and controversial question. Whatever you want to ask, feel free, hit me. Figuratively, not literally, I will see. But really, feel free to ask anything at all. It could be something we talk about. It could be a hot topic, terrorism, women's rights, Sharia, jihad, whatever. Really, feel free to ask anything at all. Okay? So before I dive in, I want to first note that we've got quite a few members of your local Islamic community here. And I'm based in Atlanta. I'm going to go home after this is over, but your local Muslim neighbors here are the ones you're going to interact with. And so I want you to see who's in the room. So if you're from the local Muslim community, please stand very briefly so that your neighbors can recognize you. Thank you all for coming. And right here we have one of the founders of the mosque here. And the new imam, I'm going to let them say a few words a little later in the program just so you can meet them and greet them and connect with them, okay? So, that's the community. These are the topics. And again, be thinking of questions as we go. If I say anything during the presentation that you're like, oh, I must have an answer right now, just feel free to raise your hand, but I'm going to leave a good bit of time afterwards to answer questions. Got it. Okay? So with that, the first segment. Who are Muslims? So before I do this, I'd like to ask a question, which is, what do you already know about Muslims or Islam or related issues? And the reason I ask this is that I don't want to talk over your head, and I don't want to talk down to you. You follow me? So for those of you who are not Muslim, Muslims don't get to answer this question. For those of you who are not Muslims, people of different faiths, what do you already know? And I'll put it this way. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, what's a Muslim? Who are you? Where am I? 5 being, I know a pretty moderate good amount. 10 being, I'm an expert. I could give your presentation for you. What do we think? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just a few people. 4. Who said 4?
I said 4.
Confidence. I like it. Well, you're running props, so you should be 4. Okay, good. And by the way, thank you, and thank you for both being here. We don't get into politics, so I'll just say I wish you both well in your race and say nothing more than that. Very much. I wish you very well. What else do we think? Any other numbers?
2, 7, 6.
Who said 7? I like the confidence factor. I like it. 7. Okay. All right. Okay. What else? We got a 1. I heard a 2. 5. 4. Okay. Any other radically different numbers? 6. Okay. We're going to put you all to the test today. I like the confidence. So I spoke to a Rotary Club. Was it yesterday morning, Friday morning? And usually when I speak, I get in the 1 to 5 range, and that's expected and that's normal. So I'll give you, a good bit of detail, but I definitely don't want to give you too much info nor too little. So I think we're okay. So what do you know about Muslims? We've done that part. So the second thing to tell you a bit about, who are Muslims? So total, there are about 1.5 to 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. That makes the Muslim community the second largest religious community in the world after the Christian community. That is, if you count Protestants and Catholics together, there are about 2.1 billion Christians, Muslim, Sunni, and Shia together, about 1.5 to 1.7 billion Muslims. Now, people of other faiths, where do most Muslims live? Somebody give me an answer.
Indonesia.
Indonesia. Well, they don't most live in Indonesia, but what region of the world would you say? How would you put that in a different way? Southeast Asia, right? Yes, absolutely. What percentage of the Muslim world do you think is Arab or lives in the Middle East or Arabic speaking? What do you think? Someone give me a number.
Less than 10.
Less than 10? What else? Other numbers? They're all wrong. Someone give me something else.
40?
40? Okay. So we got a radical difference. Okay. So when I ask this question, most audiences, what do you think they say?
Probably 80.
Yeah, 80, 51, 60, right. Okay. So I think someone came close. So it depends on the poll, but the highest number I've ever seen is 28%. The lowest number I've seen is what you have here, which is 20% from the Middle East, North Africa, etc. I like to mention that first because for most Americans it kind of boggles their mind immediately, because if you look at Fox News or any news channel really, your average Muslim has got a turban and speaking Arabic and a thobe and all that stuff. But Muslims come in all shapes and sizes, come from all around the world, white, black, everything in between. And as someone mentioned, most Muslims live in the Asia-Pacific region. So Indonesia, the largest Muslim majority country. Philippines has quite a few Muslims. Malaysia is a majority Muslim country. Got tens of millions of Muslims in China. So that region over there has the largest number of Muslims. So I always like to joke that you might think most Muslims look Arab, but your average Muslim probably looks like Jackie Chan. But you just don't know that. Statistically, it's just very likely. Okay? And Jackie's not a Muslim, by the way, just for one. So these are the general percentages. Okay, 61% there, 20% Middle East, North Africa, 15% Sub-Saharan Africa, 2% in Europe. So as you know, Europe has a pretty significant minority Muslim population. France has a pretty significant Muslim population, minority Muslim. The United Kingdom does as well. I like to mention those two countries because they're kind of emblematic of how different Muslims are, the Muslim experiences in Europe, depending on what country you're in. So if you go to England, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Muslims, especially in London. As you may know, London has a Muslim mayor now, Mayor Khan, right? Muslims in England, British Muslims, very politically active, very socially engaged, very active in society. And there are hate crimes, hate speech, but generally accepted and prosperous members of society. You go to France, it's a very different story. France has a significant problem with Islamophobia. A lot of Muslims are of a lower economic class, live in ghettos, and there's a lot of tension in France. A lot of it has to do with just how the French government works. Their idea of secularism is not only a separation of church and state, but kind of an exclusion of religion from the public sphere. So no religious symbols in school. They just passed a law saying that elected officials can't wear religious symbols in their House of Parliament. And so it's two very different environments for Muslims between France and England. And I think that Muslims in America, who we'll talk about in a moment, are kind of in the middle between those. We're not doing as well as British Muslims, and we're not nearly doing as badly as French Muslims are. We'll talk about that in a moment. Anyone know what the countries are that are ethnically or racially, you could say white, but majority Muslim? There are a few. Bosnia, yes, very good, which suffered a genocide in the 90s, and now you have many Bosnian Americans who are here who fled the genocide. There's another one that's not a country anymore, but it was a country briefly in the 1990s. You know what I'm talking about? Who said that? Tom Marks, very good, yes, excellent. Chechnya, so Chechnya is part of Russia. It was part of the Soviet Union. They broke away and declared independence when the Soviets collapsed. They were free for almost 10 years before Vladimir Putin went back in, crushed the resistance, took back over the state. So now it is a part of Russia again. But that's a country that is ethnically white, majority Muslim. I mention that because a lot of Americans, they can't even fathom a white Muslim, but there are many, many white American Muslims and many quote-unquote white Muslims in other parts of the world. So those are Muslims in general around the world. There's a lot of Muslim history from the Islamic Golden Age, the beginning of Islam. We're not going to get into a lot of the global Muslim history because I want to focus on American Muslims, but those are just generally the stats about who Muslims are, demographically speaking, around the world. Next, how many Muslims are there in America? Non-Muslims, tell me, what do you think? Or what percentage do you think of the country is Muslim? 4? Okay. I heard 4, I heard 7. 2%? Very good, Valerie. Top marks. Okay. So, again, depends on the poll. The American government obviously does not ask people what religion they are during the census. There might be some leaders who want to do that now, but as of now, that is not happening, right? So, about 3.35 million American Muslims. So, that's really about maybe 1% of the population, maybe less, maybe more, depending on the poll that you ask, but the poll of the American people. The highest number I've seen is 6 million. The White House, the last White House, pegs it at 6 million. But Pew and most other polls put it at 3 million American Muslims as of 2017. A few unique things to know. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the United States. That is largely due to conversion rates. It's the fastest growing religion around the world, largely due to birth rates. Okay? A few other things. About 150,000 Muslims in the state of Georgia. Again, that's an estimate. If you look at how many mosques there are in Georgia, 73. How many people show up on the biggest holiday? You do the math. You can get to this rough estimate of how many Muslims there are in Georgia. One really unique thing about American Muslims, we're the most racially diverse U.S. religious group. What do I mean by that? If you ask American Muslims, what's your ethnic background, this is what you end up getting. This is a Gallup poll from 2008 that asked people of different religious groups what their race is. So, the Jewish community, about 93% identify as white. Mormons, about 91% identify as white. 76% Catholics, you had 11% Hispanic. Protestants, 88% white, 8% African American, and some other. And then you get to this little melting pot here of the Muslim community. About 20% Gallup counts as white, which is actually mostly Arab. 35% African American, 18% Asian, and then you've got a bit of other. So the question of how, and you'll find this if you will go back one, that diversity exists all around the country. You go to any state, you're going to find a pretty wild difference in the ethnic and cultural background of Muslims. This shows you the distribution of mosques in the United States as of 2011. So Texas, California, New York, and Florida have the largest number of mosques in Illinois as well. Chicago's got a big Muslim population. Tier, Georgia, Virginia, etc. Second tier, light blue states going on, and then these states have the smallest number of Muslims. But wherever you go, you find that racial, that ethnic, that cultural diversity. And I think that's a really good thing, to have a religious group that's that diverse, it's that big of a melting pot. But it does create an issue, which is that if you have people from so many different cultures, it's really easy for even Muslims to mistake something cultural we do for something religious. And it's even easier for someone who's not a Muslim at all to see something cultural and think that it's something religious, part of Islam. So a lot of the time that I spend is explaining the difference between some cultural things and some religious things. That crazy thing you saw in the news, that's not actually an Islamic thing, that's just something from someone's particular culture. We'll talk about that in a bit. How did this happen? How do we end up with this racial, this ethnic diversity of Muslims in the United States? And for that, we have to go to the history of American Muslims. So for people who are not Muslim, people of other faiths, when did Muslims first come here in large numbers? When did they first come? And I'll give you a hint. When did they first come to this continent in large numbers?
Slavery.
Very good, Valerie. Yes, slavery. So according to historians, about 1/3, at least 1/3 of the African slaves brought to America before it was America were Muslim. Obviously, plantation owners did not allow freedom of religion, so Islam was usually wiped out within a generation or two of being present on this continent. But some Muslims did manage to hold on to their faith. I'm going to tell you about 3 of them here. Anyone know who the man on the left here is? You might have seen the movie about him. So this is a man known as the Prince. He was from the Gambia. He was a Gambian prince. He was sold into slavery, brought to the United States, lived here as a slave for quite a few years before anyone realized who he was. When the State Department identified him, they paid for his freedom and sent him back to Africa. He passed away about 4 months after making it back to the continent. I don't know if he ever actually made it back to the Gambia where he was from, but he was there in Africa about 4 months before he passed away. On the right here is Mr. Yaro Mamet. He was a slave who won his freedom and was actually a financer in Georgetown, where I lived for quite a bit. He worked in the docks there. Anyone been to Georgetown, seen a bit about Georgetown? So he lived there and worked there as a financer. So it was unusual that he was a Muslim slave who was actually financially well off after he was freed. The last one I want to mention to you, the one who interests me the most, Mr. Omar ibn Said. So he was a man who lived as a slave and died in the 1800s. So what's unique about him is that he managed to hold on to his Muslim faith, but he did it by not letting his master know what he was doing. So as you know, slaves were usually not allowed to read and write. He was allowed to read and write, but his master thought he was writing verses of the New Testament in Arabic. In fact, he would write like the Lord's Prayer on top of documents and write a bunch of stuff in Arabic. So for the Muslims in the room who can read this, what is that? Okay, well these are verses from the Quran, one of the chapters of the Quran. So he would write this and then write something different at the top so no one knew that he was actually holding on to his faith late into his life. And so his manuscripts of what he wrote are now displayed in a museum, I think in North Carolina right now. So this is Mr. Omar Ibn Said. So these are some of the few people who managed to hold on to their faith. For most people, their faith was forcibly beaten out of them or out of their children. So Islam fades away pretty quickly in the 1700s. One other unique thing I'll mention is that despite that, there were some people with at least Muslim names who were registered as soldiers in the Revolutionary War fighting for the Americans, and also in the Civil War as well. We don't know if they're actually Muslim practicing, but they had Muslim names. So, you don't see Muslims again until the mid-20th century in large numbers when the Civil Rights Movement is going on. Who's that?
Malcolm X.
Mr. X and Muhammad Ali, right? So, in America in the 1900s, this new religion was founded called the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam took some beliefs of regular Islam, mixed it with black nationalism, and created this new faith that was led by a man named Elijah Muhammad. Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X were its two most famous members. The nation taught a variety of things. They taught that the black man was God, that white people were devils, that's why they were racist, that blacks and whites should be segregated, and other things that are not normal Islamic beliefs. They were also, though, very good at bringing men out of poverty and into a kind of moral station, and clearing away drugs out of local neighborhoods and things. So they did some positive things, but they had some very odd beliefs. Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali both left the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X left the nation in the mid-1960s. Part of the reason is that he went on the pilgrimage to Mecca, which we'll talk about in a bit. And while there, he saw white Muslims and black Muslims and